The photograph surfaced in 1987 during the quiet liquidation of an elderly widow's estate in North Yorkshire. The sale drew little attention, just a scattering of local collectors, curious neighbours, and one man whose curiosity would outlast everyone else's, Frank Mercer, a retired surveyor with a fascination for forgotten relics. The widow's name was never printed in the auction record. Only her initials, E.L., appeared on the ledger. She had lived alone in a crumbling Georgian house for more than 40 years, her husband long dead, her children estranged. By the time the auctioneer pried open the wardrobe at the back of her bedroom, the floorboards had warped, and the scent of mildew clung to every surface. Inside, wrapped in newspaper dated from 1939, lay the photograph. When the paper was peeled back, the print gave off a faint crackle, like dry leaves underfoot. The image had survived better than anyone could have expected. A large cabinet card, sepia-toned and mounted on stiff backing, embossed in gold with the words, R. Halbrook and Company Portraiture, Harrogate, 1904. The photograph showed a family of 6, posed with deliberate symmetry in front of an ornate studio backdrop. The father sat on the left, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark officer's uniform. His moustache was neatly trimmed, his expression calm but unreadable. Beside him stood a boy in a matching cadet cap, barely 12, his posture rigid as though mimicking his father's. In the center sat the mother, stern, pale, hands folded tightly in her lap. Around her clustered 3 daughters, arranged by age and height. The eldest, dressed in white, held a folded newspaper on her knee. The youngest, positioned at her mother's knee, wore a dark pinafore and clutched 2 small white flowers. At first glance, it looked like any Edwardian family portrait. Solemn, composed, their gazes locked forever on the photographer's lens. But as the auctioneer passed it around the room, more than one person remarked on how strangely alive the image seemed. The light fell evenly across the backdrop, yet a faint shadow clung around the boy's outline, darker than the rest. One woman whispered that it looked as though he were standing half in sunlight, half in something else. Frank purchased it for £2, along with a trunk of minor antiques. He intended to resell the lot, but found himself keeping the photograph. There was something about the father's calm stare, the mother's clenched hands, the tension frozen between the figures that unsettled him. That night, he propped the frame on his mantelpiece, poured himself a small whiskey, and tried not to stare at it too long. A week later, he noticed the first anomaly. Under daylight, the photo remained warm and brown, the sepia tones comforting in their age. But beneath lamplight, the surface cooled, drifting toward grey, the whites flattening, the shadows thickening. The father's buttons glimmered like wet metal. The boy's face blurred faintly, as if the emulsion itself were shifting. Frank examined the card under a magnifier. The print had held up remarkably well, no moisture damage, no mold. Yet the boy's outline resisted focus. The edges of his shoulders seemed to waver, as though he were both there and not. He told himself it was fatigue, or perhaps just the uneven glow of his reading lamp. Still, the next morning, he carried the photograph to the Harrogate Photography Club, where retired hobbyists gathered weekly to restore old negatives. When they placed it beneath their enlargement scope, the details sharpened, and so did the unease. The family name was faintly penciled on the back, the Carraways, June 1904. Under magnification, the youngest girl's hand, so small it might have been overlooked, was clenched around something metallic, a faint glint half hidden beneath the folds of her skirt. The eldest daughter leaned slightly away from her jaw tight. The boy's expression was stranger still, his mouth parted a fraction, his gaze aimed not at the camera but just beside it, as if something or someone stood near the photographer's shoulder. One of the club members, a former chemist named Douglas, adjusted the lamp and frowned. "That shadow behind the boy," he murmured. It's not cast from any of the others. Look, lights from the left. Yet that one falls forward. Frank said nothing, but a faint chill crept along his spine. Among the members was Margaret Doyle, a local historian known for her tireless patience and appetite for the obscure. She volunteered to research the Carraways. Within a few days, she produced a dossier of census extracts and parish notes. Samuel Carraway, age 41 in 1901, schoolmaster at St. Albans Parish School. His wife, Edith Carraway, age 38, seamstress. Children, Clara, 14, Hattie, 12, James, 10. They lived in the schoolhouse itself, a two-story brick building on the outskirts of Harrogate, beside a copse of birch trees and the railway line. No further records appeared after 1905. The trail simply stopped. Margaret expanded her search to local papers and found an entry buried on the third page of the Harrogate Advertiser, dated March 1906. Tragic fire at former schoolhouse, 1 child lost. A distressing accident befell the family of the late schoolmaster, Mr. Samuel Carraway. Their youngest child, James, perished in an accidental blaze believed to have originated in a rear storage room. The building was consumed before assistance arrived. Mrs. Carraway and her daughters escaped. There were no photographs, no follow-up, no obituary, only that single column of polite brevity. But one line lodged itself in Margaret's mind. The building was consumed before assistance arrived. She knew Harrogate's fire brigade archives. Such incidents always listed recovered remains. Yet no body was recorded. Margaret shared her findings with Frank over tea one rain-soaked evening. He listened, his hands folded over the photograph, knuckles pale. "No remains," he said quietly. "None. Not even a shoe buckle. It's as if the boy simply vanished." Frank glanced toward the photograph leaning against the wall. In the amber glow of the room, the image seemed darker again. The boy's outline, yes, there, appeared almost smudged, as if someone had brushed across the print with an oily thumb. Local interviews yielded older stories. A retired groundskeeper recalled hearing his grandfather speak of the haunted schoolhouse. Another villager, the daughter of a midwife, said her grandmother used to whisper that the Carraway's boy spoke to corners. "He'd sit facing the wall," she said, "and talk soft, like someone was answering back." One winter before the fire, he reportedly stopped speaking altogether. When asked what was wrong, he had said, "He's teaching me." And when pressed who he was, the child only smiled and pointed to the dark attic above the classroom. The mystery deepened weeks later when Frank decided to reframe the print. He carefully removed the brittle mount, prizing it from its backing board. A smaller photograph slipped out from behind, curled at the edges, lighter in tone. It showed the same family, the same studio backdrop, the same arrangement, but with a single difference. The boy's chair was empty. The remaining 5 sat closer together, their posture relaxed, the faintest trace of smiles ghosting their lips. The mother's right hand, resting on her lap, clutched something dark, blackened and indistinct. On the reverse, written in faded ink, were 4 words: "We took him out." Frank's hands trembled. The paper smelled faintly of smoke. He brought both prints to Margaret. They compared them beneath her magnifier. In the first, the studio curtain behind the family was drawn. In the second, it hung open, revealing the edge of a painted backdrop. An indoor wall, not a porch as they had once assumed. Through a gap in the set's false window, a blurred reflection appeared. The faint shape of something small and upright, turned toward the lens. "It's not a reflection," Margaret whispered. "It's standing behind the glass." They drove to the outskirts of Harrogate one cold October afternoon to find the old schoolhouse. The building itself was gone. A newer structure, a post-war community hall, stood in its place. Yet remnants of the foundation jutted through the soil behind it, moss-covered and cracked. At the far end of the lot grew an oak tree, massive and gnarled, its roots swallowing what had once been the rear storage room. The ground beneath was uneven, sunken in places as if the earth had settled around something long buried. Margaret crouched by the roots and brushed away damp leaves. Her fingertips came away black with soot. Beneath the soil, half buried, lay a curved iron handle, the remains of a kettle or lamp. On its side, almost invisible, were the initials, J.C. They stared at it in silence. The wind through the branches sounded like the crackle of faint static. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was scarcely audible. If he was never found, what exactly did they bury? Over the following months, Margaret continued her research, uncovering a series of private letters sold decades earlier to an antiques dealer in Lincolnshire. The correspondence was written by Edith Carraway to her sister, each letter more frantic than the last. The first dated July 1906. The nights are worst. He knocks from the attic, though the floor is cold stone. Samuel says I am imagining it, but the girls hear it too. The second, October 1906. I woke to find his shoes by the hearth again. I burned them once more. They return each morning. The last, January 1907, ended mid-sentence. If he asks for the chalk again, I shall have to. No further letters were ever found. Frank and Margaret decided to exhibit the photographs publicly at a small Harrogate museum devoted to Edwardian domestic life. They prepared careful notes, omitting the darker rumors. The curator placed both prints side by side under glass. For 2 days, nothing unusual occurred. On the third evening, as staff prepared to close, one attendant claimed to see the glass vibrate faintly, as if touched from beneath. Another said the reflection of the boy's shadow, visible in the first photograph, no longer pointed toward the floor but stretched across the carpet toward the second frame. By morning, the curator had ordered both withdrawn. When Frank collected them, he noticed a faint smudge on the inside of the glass, 5 small fingerprints clustered near the bottom edge, child-sized. For the next decade, Frank kept the photographs sealed in his study. He spoke rarely of them, though his journal, discovered after his death in 1989, revealed a growing obsession. The shadows have moved again. Heard tapping behind the wall. Always 3 taps, pause, 2 more. Sometimes the boy's face clears in the lamplight. The mouth open, no sound. I think he's still trying to speak. Neighbors later told his niece that in his final years, Frank complained of a smell of soot and chalk dust that lingered no matter how often he aired the room. After Frank Mercer's death in 1989, his niece Ellen Harper inherited the trunk that contained his notes, correspondence, and the 2 Carraway photographs. She had no particular interest in history. She was an accountant by trade, but she could not bring herself to discard them. Something in the stillness of the family's faces held her. The officer father with his controlled authority, the mother's folded hands, the boy in uniform, whose gaze seemed to slip sideways toward some point the rest could not see. For several years, the prints remained untouched in Ellen's attic. Then, during the long winter of 1993, she decided to donate them to the Yorkshire Museum of Early Photography, newly opened in Leeds. The curator who accepted them, Dr. Patrick Linton, recorded their arrival in his accession log. 2 cabinet portraits, R. Halbrook and Company, Harrogate, 1904. Provenance, estate of F. Mercer. Condition, stable. Emulsion, darkened along lower margins. Subject, family group, unidentified, possibly Carraway. He filed the photographs under restricted access due to their fragility, unaware that he had reopened a century-old wound. The first person to examine the prints closely in decades was Anna Rowley, a graduate conservator assisting with digitization. She prepared the negatives on a winter morning in 1995, her breath fogging the chilled air of the lab. As she scanned the first image, the complete family, she noted the usual irregularities of old albumin paper, small fissures, mild silvering. Yet as the scanner's light passed over the boy's face, the equipment flickered and stopped. When the screen refreshed, the digital preview showed something impossible. For a heartbeat, the image inverted into negative. Pale faces turned black, shadows bleached white. In that instant, the boy's features sharpened. His mouth formed a perfect circle, lips rounded as if exhaling or whispering. His eyes, wide and brilliant, seemed to meet hers directly through the screen. Anna recoiled, heart hammering. The next frame displayed normally, the expression blurred again. She wrote a terse note in the file. Scanner malfunction. Possible static interference. 2 weeks later, she resigned from the museum without explanation. Dr. Linton, puzzled by the abrupt departure, reviewed her work. Beneath her neat technical reports, he found a page of hurried handwriting. The second photograph is not a copy. It was taken after. Shadows reversed, light coming from opposite side. Father's eyes fixed forward, mother's to the right, toward empty space. Hands show pressure marks, mother gripping boy's wrist, bruising visible when contrast increased. In later image, hand empty but same marks remain as pale rings. Something in the background window. Figure, size of a child, proportions wrong. Facing inward, he closed the folder quickly. Staff superstition spread fast in old institutions, and he wanted no rumors. The Caraway prints were sealed in archival envelopes, labeled handle only under full light. Yet, even under full light, strangeness lingered. Several archivists complained of a faint odor, wood smoke mixed with damp fabric, that seemed to cling to the sleeves after handling the envelopes. One described the sensation of grit beneath her fingertips, as though the glossy paper held a residue of dust. Chemical tests found nothing. In 2019, as part of a modernization grant, the museum undertook a high-resolution rescanning of its Edwardian collection. A team of photographic historians oversaw the process. Among them was Dr. Leonie Firth, who specialized in composite overlays, aligning sequential portraits to study subtle shifts in posture. She loaded both Caraway images into her software, aligning them by the father's epaulets. When she merged the two layers, she expected minor displacement from the studio's camera movement. Instead, the shadows conflicted entirely. In the first photograph, illumination fell left to right. In the second, right to left. Identical backdrops, identical composition, yet different light. They can't have been taken minutes apart, she murmured. Different time of day, or different day altogether. As she fine-tuned opacity, a third shape appeared between the father's right arm and the empty chair where the boy had once sat, a faint silhouette, smaller than either parent. Its head reached only to the woman's shoulder. The suggestion of a hand reached upward, fingers spread. The others dismissed it as an artifact of exposure blending. But when the composite rendered to full resolution, the faint outline persisted, independent of either layer. Later that night, Leonie reviewed the file alone. The office lights dimmed automatically at 9. In the glow of her monitor, the figure's contour seemed to pulse with each refresh. A whisper of friction rose behind her, chalk sliding across plaster. She turned sharply. The white wall behind her bore a single looping letter drawn in dust. J. She left the lab without powering down the computer. The cleaning staff found the mark still there the next morning. Publicly, the museum maintained neutrality. Its catalogue entry summarized the Caraway tragedy in the dry cadence of archivists. Family photographed 1904, residence Harrogate. Schoolhouse destroyed by accidental fire 1906, one child deceased. Surviving members relocated to Lincolnshire. Privately, correspondence between curators reveals unease. One letter from 1996. When light levels drop, tonal contrast increases, almost as if image absorbs illumination. Under sodium lamp, boy's figure emits faint luminescence, possibly reaction of albumin silver to heat, though I've never seen it manifest selectively. Another, unsigned. Please ensure prints stored apart. During inventory, I heard distinct tapping inside drawer, 3 slow, 2 quick. Could be pipes, but timing too precise. By 2001, the Caraway photographs were transferred to restricted materials, room B17. Access required 2 signatures. Few requested it. Still, rumors attracted the curious. Twice a year, scholars petitioned to see the prints. The sessions followed strict protocol: bright light, gloves, no magnification. Visitors almost always left disappointed. The portraits, under fluorescent glare, appeared merely somber. Yet once the light dimmed, inevitably, as bulbs aged or flickered, something happened. A graduate student described it best in her thesis footnote. At reduced illumination, shadows deepen disproportionately around the boy's figure. Parallax shifts suggest subtle movement within the emulsion, microscopic, perhaps chemical, but it creates the uncanny illusion of breath. Staff began jokingly referring to the prints as the living negatives. Few found the joke funny for long. In 2004, centenary of the date stamped on the mount, the museum commissioned historian Dr. Margaret Doyle, by then elderly but still active, to write a contextual essay. She returned to the archives she had once pored over with Frank Mercer decades earlier. Her new research confirmed that Samuel Caraway's final parish donation, 2 weeks before the fire, included a note from the vicar. Bless him, he believes it will silence the voice. Margaret's essay, never officially published, ended with a speculation written in her own hand. Perhaps the voice was not in the boy, but around him, something they tried to bind or burn away. The later photograph may have been their exorcism, proof of purity, absence rendered visible. But film, like memory, does not forget the removed. She died that same year. Her executor found a single object on her writing desk, a modern reprint of the Caraway portrait. Across its surface ran 5 small prints, the size of a child's hand, pressed in faint ash. Today, the Caraway photographs rest in a climate-controlled drawer, sealed within linen folders. Few visitors ever request them. Yet each year, during the museum's after-hours audit, technicians note the same phenomena: slight shifts in humidity readings, the scent of burnt paper, and the recurring residue of chalk on the drawer's brass handle. Under bright light, the family appears unchanged. A stiff Edwardian tableau. The uniformed father with measured pride, the mother holding herself against some invisible weight, 3 daughters arranged in perfect decorum, and at their center, the faint blur of a boy who seems less printed than remembered. But in low light, when the fluorescents buzz and the shadows lengthen across the storage room, the illusion of stillness fails. The boy's figure brightens fractionally, as though catching a glimmer from another source unseen. The mother's right hand tightens, veins rising beneath the skin of silver nitrate. The eldest daughter's eyes shift, no longer toward the camera, but downward, to that empty space beside her brother's chair. And sometimes, when the last staff member leaves and the automatic lights shut off, security cameras record a brief spike of luminescence from drawer B17, no longer than a blink. Frame by frame, the monitors show nothing but a flare of white where the photograph lies. Yet the motion sensors register the faintest disturbance in the air, like breath drawn between words. The museum does not display the Caraway portraits. They are too fragile, too sensitive, the official explanation goes. Yet among staff, the real reason circulates in whispers. The emulsion reacts unpredictably to darkness. Archivists tell each new hire the same rule. Never look at the prints under dim light, and never, under any circumstance, turn your back before the covers are closed. Because in that fractional moment between shadow and illumination, the composition seems to alter. The father leans slightly forward, as if listening. The mother's gaze softens with weary recognition, and between them, half-formed, the faint outline of a small figure rises from the background. The boy, uniform crisp, mouth parted as though to speak. The light returns, and he is gone again. Yet the smell remains, a trace of soot, of chalk dust, of paper singed at the edges. As if somewhere inside the chemical grain of the photograph, the fire has never fully gone out. And if you listen closely, in the silence between the ticking thermostats and the hum of ventilation, you might catch it. The almost imperceptible sound of chalk on plaster, drawing one careful line at a time, completing a family that refuses to stay buried.